Hello Whisperers, I'm your host Dr. Fee and this is the Whispering Podcast. You're in for a treat. Today we begin a two-part special exploring one of the most enduring, documented, debated and let's start again. I've only just started. See, the problem is I'm so excited to do this. I haven't even got to the bit where I tell you what it's all about. I am so excited. I could wet myself. Let's start again. Calm down. Today, we begin a two-part special exploring one of the most enduring, documented, debated, and my personal favourite hauntings of British history. A cold brick structure that stood silently beside a churchyard. A woman in black who walks without sound. And the man who turns its story into a national obsession. What am I talking about? I'm talking about Borley Rectory. So excited. Dubbed, quote, the most haunted house in England, end quote. Borley's legend began in the mid-19th century and reached full fever pitch by the 1930s, thanks to poltergeist, phantom coaches, whispered messages scrawled on the walls, and one very, very famous ghost hunter. But here's the question. Was it real? Or was Borley a masterclass in illusion, psychology, and spiritual longing? In this first of two parts, we're going to explore Borley. La 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 la. In the first part of our Borley exploration, we'll cover the origins, the earliest hauntings, the Smith and Bull families, and the arrival of the infamous Harry Price, the showman investigator who helped immortalise the mystery. So, grab yourself a cup of tea, sit down, put your feet up. Let's head off to the Suffolk countryside, where something is always whispering, but just out of sight. I'm so excited. A house with a reputation. Borley Rectory was built in 1862, commissioned by Reverend Henry Dawson Ellis Ball, near the 12th century Borley Church. The site already carried an air of mystery. According to local law, the rectory was built on Masonic land, possibly the ruins of an earlier building tied to a Benedictine priory. From the very beginning, the Bull family reported strange phenomena. Footsteps in the hall, bells ringing with no one there, disembodied whispers, and the most famous of all, the ghost of a nun seen gliding silently across the grounds. The legend said a monk and a nun fell in love and tried to elope. When caught, the monk was hung and the nun bricked up alive inside the walls of her convent. Though likely Though likely folklore, the story persisted and gave shape to the hauntings. The Bull children especially claimed to see the phantom nun walking a gravel path that would later be known as the Nun's Walk. By 1892, Reverend Ball died in his study, some say in the very chair where he first saw the nun. The Smiths move in. After the Ball family left the rectory, it was briefly left vacant until Reverend Guy Eric Smith and his wife Mabel moved in 1928. They'd heard the stories, they understood the risks, but they weren't overly concerned. But that changed very quickly. Within weeks of moving in, the Smiths reported experiences that included phantom footsteps at night, muffled voices behind locked doors, a headless apparition in the garden, and objects vanishing and reappearing in odd places. I love it. I love everything about Borley. I've known about... Oh, sorry, I just dropped my coaster. Hang on. I've known about Borley probably about 20... No, more than that. Probably about 30 years. Probably about 30 years I've known about Borley. And I had the pleasure of visiting Suffolk quite a lot in my late teens. And I have been to the site of Borley Rectory. And I can't even put into words what the energy of the site feels like. You can't go where the building once was, but you're able to walk the lane next to where the rectory is and between the church. And disturbing is a word. And it is bizarre because it is definitely a pocket of uncomfortable energy that sits around the perimeter of what would have been the rectory. It's definitely there. You take one step and you're inside and it's like, ooh, I don't like this. Step over there, absolutely fine. Absolutely fine. It's bizarre. It's bizarre is what it is. Mrs. Smith discovered a box hidden in a cupboard. Inside it, a human skull was found, apparently belonging to a young woman. Disturbed, they contacted the Daily Mirror, who in turn suggested someone more, quote, qualified, end quote, to investigate. A man whose name would permanently become attached to Borley and its story. Enter Harry Price. Harry Price was not a priest or even an academic. He was a showman, a researcher of the paranormal, and perhaps, more importantly, a self-made myth maker. Price arrived at Borley in June 1929, accompanied by a reporter from the Daily Mirror. Almost immediately, the phenomena escalated. Stones were thrown at Price, vases moved across tables, a mirror shattered spontaneously. Bells rang, objects flew, and often when Price was nearby. He was charismatic, persuasive, and wrote about his findings with dramatic flair. He would later describe Borley as, quote, the most haunted house in England, end quote, a tagline that has stuck to this very day. Skeptics accused him of planting evidence, but many witnesses, journalists, neighbours, even members of the clergy claimed to have experienced the phenomena firsthand. Price's short visit ended with a media frenzy and the Smiths leaving Borley Rectory forever. I'm hot. The Foyster family arrive. In 1930, Reverend Lionel Foyster and his wife Marianne and their adopted daughter moved into Borley Rectory. What followed was perhaps the most intense and violent period of the alleged activity within the rectory itself. Reports included locked doors opening by themselves, furniture being hauled across the rooms, Marianne being slapped, scratched and pushed, messages appearing on walls, written in pencil, seemingly pleading for help. Quote, "Marianne, please help me," end quote, one message read. Phantom footsteps, ghostly chanting and glowing lights. Price maintained contact with the Foysters, but was not present during the most extreme incidents. The clergy began to suspect Marianne was at the centre, either as a psychic medium or as a hoaxer and attention seeker. Marianne herself later admitted to exaggerating some events, but insisted that many were absolutely real. The house itself became a magnet for the curious, the terrified, and the sceptical. The rectory, once just an old vicarage, was now a full-blown paranormal legend. I bloody love it. Psychological versus paranormal. Some researchers now suggest that Borley wasn't a hoax, but a complex case of psychological projection, grief, repression, and spiritual yearning. Consider this. The Ball family were deeply religious, haunted by their own guilt and expectations. The Smith family were isolated and sceptical, yet unnerved by what they couldn't explain. The Foyster family, especially Marianne, were trapped in a difficult marriage and possibly expressing their turmoil energetically. Through a metaphysical lens, such emotional conditions could become fuel for paranormal phenomena, where emotion and environment fuse, creating poltergeist-like manifestations. Was Borley a haunted house or a mirror for haunted people? So here are my closing thoughts for part 1. By the mid-1930s, the house was nearly unlivable. In 1937, the Foyster family left, and Harry Price leased the house for a full year, turning it into a laboratory of the strange. But that's the story for part 2. Borley Rectory stood until 1939, when it was severely damaged by fire and later demolished in 1944. But its legend remains untouched by flame. In part 2, we'll examine Price's year-long investigation, the infamous seance experiments, the fire itself, the accusations of fraud, and ask once more, was Borley Rectory... No, we won't. No, we won't. In part 2. No, we won't. Because I got it wrong. I was doing so well as well, wasn't I? In part 2, we'll examine Price's year-long investigation, the infamous seance experiments, the fire, the accusations of fraud, and ask once more, was Borley Rectory ever truly haunted? What do you think? Thank you so much for listening to today's Whisper. If you have any stories to share or thoughts on today's episode, let us know at hello@thewhisperingpodcast. No, because that's wrong. Podcast. Thank you so much for listening to today's Whisper. If you have any stories you'd like to share or thoughts on today's episode, let us know at hello@thewhisperingpodcast.co.uk. Don't forget to like this episode and definitely don't forget to hit subscribe before you leave. Until next time, sleep well. Bye. See you for part 2.